think now is not the time for introductions.
Time out! Excuse me, bad guys. I am running out of air. Gotta get pumped.
Robin Hood. Men in Tights may look like a simple comedy from the 1990s, but behind the ridiculous jokes, musical numbers, and outrageous characters lies a film packed with surprising stories. Directed by comedy legend Mel Brooks, this parody became a cult favorite that fans still quote today, but many people don't know what really happened behind the scenes. From hidden jokes to casting secrets, here are 21 crazy facts about Robin Hood. Men in Tights. 1. Mel Brooks saw the perfect target in the Robin Hood craze. In the early 1990s, Robin Hood suddenly became one of Hollywood's favorite stories again. The biggest example was the 1991 blockbuster Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, starring Kevin Costner. The film was a massive hit and dominated the box office, but it also received criticism for taking itself very seriously. For legendary comedy director Mel Brooks, that seriousness made the story the perfect target for parody. Brooks had already built a reputation for turning popular genres upside down. He mocked westerns in Blazing Saddles, horror movies in Young Frankenstein, and the space opera craze with Spaceballs. Each time Hollywood produced a blockbuster genre, Brooks found a way to exaggerate its cliches and turn them into comedy gold. So when the Robin Hood legend came roaring back into popularity, Brooks saw an opportunity. Instead of creating a serious medieval adventure, he decided to take everything audiences expected from a Robin Hood film and flip it into a joke. Noble speeches, heroic sword fights, dramatic music, and epic battles would all be turned into absurd comedy moments. But Brooks didn't just want to parody one movie. He wanted to poke fun at the entire Robin Hood tradition. That meant referencing everything from the swashbuckling classic The Adventures of Robin Hood starring Errol Flynn to the newer blockbuster starring Costner. The result was Robin Hood. Men in Tights, a film that mixed classic Mel Brooks humor with the familiar story of the outlaw hero who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. And Brooks knew exactly what he was doing. He once joked that Robin Hood movies had become so dramatic and serious that audiences were ready to laugh at them again. That's why Men in Tights doesn't just parody the legend, it exaggerates everything about it. The heroic speeches become ridiculous, the villains become cartoonishly evil, and even the costumes become part of the joke. In fact, the movie's title itself was a direct parody of the traditional Robin Hood costume. The result was a comedy that didn't just make fun of one movie, it mocked an entire genre. And more than 30 years later, fans still consider it one of the funniest parodies ever made. 2. Cary Elwes was cast because he looked like the perfect Robin Hood. When it came time to cast Robin Hood, director Mel Brooks knew he needed someone very specific. The role required an actor who looked like a classic heroic leading man, but who could also handle fast-paced comedy. That actor turned out to be Cary Elwes. At the time, Elwes was already known to many audiences for his role as Westley in the beloved fantasy film The Princess Bride. In that movie, he played a charming and heroic swordsman, which made him the perfect choice for a parody of the Robin Hood legend. Mel Brooks believed that comedy works best when the main character takes everything seriously. If Robin Hood himself acted like a clown, the joke wouldn't work. But if the hero behaved like he was in a dramatic medieval epic while ridiculous things were happening around him, the comedy became much funnier. That's exactly what Cary Elwes delivered. He played Robin Hood as a confident, noble hero who genuinely believed in his mission, even while surrounded by absurd characters and ridiculous situations. This straight-faced approach made the jokes land much harder. Elwes also had another major advantage. He was physically perfect for the role. He looked exactly like the traditional Robin Hood seen in classic adventure films. Tall, athletic, handsome, and believable with a sword. This made the parody even funnier because he seemed like he belonged in a serious historical epic. According to Brooks, Elwes understood the tone of the movie immediately. Instead of trying to act overly silly, he played the role with complete sincerity, letting the script's jokes create the comedy. The result was one of the most memorable performances in the film. Even decades later, many fans still consider Cary Elwes one of the most entertaining versions of Robin Hood ever put on screen. And interestingly, Elwes himself has said that Robin Hood, Men in Tights remains one of his favorite roles of his entire career. 3. The movie parodies more than just one Robin Hood film. Many people assume Robin Hood. Men in Tights was simply mocking the 1991 blockbuster Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And while that movie was definitely a major target, director Mel Brooks actually filled the film with references to many different Robin Hood versions from across decades. One of the biggest inspirations was the classic 1938 adventure film, The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Errol Flynn. That movie helped define what audiences imagine when they think of Robin Hood. Colorful costumes, heroic sword fights, and dramatic speeches about justice. Brooks loved that version, but he also loved exaggerating its cliches. In Men in Tights, many scenes intentionally mimic the style of classic Robin Hood films before twisting them into comedy. The heroic entrances become ridiculous, the sword fights become overly dramatic, and the serious speeches suddenly turn into punchlines. Even the costumes were designed to resemble the colorful outfits seen in the old Errol Flynn movies. At the same time, the film also takes direct shots at the more modern Robin Hood movie starring Kevin Costner. That version tried to be dark and serious, which made it perfect material for Brooks's style of humor. One of the most famous jokes in Men in Tights directly references Costner's performance. Early in the film, Robin Hood says, "Unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent." That single line became one of the most memorable jokes in the movie because audiences instantly understood what it meant. Costner's Robin Hood had famously used an American accent in Prince of Thieves, something critics pointed out constantly. Brooks turned that criticism into a quick and hilarious punchline. This layered parody is one of the reasons the movie worked so well. Instead of mocking just one film, Robin Hood, Men in Tights makes fun of the entire Robin Hood legacy, from classic Hollywood swashbucklers to modern blockbuster adaptations. And that wide range of references helped turn the film into a comedy that fans still enjoy decades later. 4. That famous English accent joke was a direct shot at Kevin Costner. One of the most quoted lines in Robin Hood, Men in Tights, happens just moments after Robin Hood appears on screen. Looking confidently at the camera, he proudly says, "Unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent." The joke lasts only a few seconds, but audiences immediately understood the reference. It was a clear jab at Kevin Costner, who played Robin Hood in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. When that movie was released in 1991, critics and fans noticed something strange. Costner barely attempted a British accent. Instead, he spoke with his natural American voice for most of the film. While the movie itself became a huge box office success, the accent issue became one of its most famous criticisms. Many reviewers joked that Robin Hood sounded like he had traveled from California instead of medieval England. That's exactly the kind of moment that director Mel Brooks loved to parody. Brooks understood that audiences already knew about the accent controversy, so instead of ignoring it, he turned it into one of the first jokes in the movie. The humor worked perfectly because it was quick, simple, and instantly recognizable. As soon as the line was spoken, viewers who had seen Costner's film burst out laughing. Interestingly, the joke wasn't meant as a personal attack. Brooks was famous for poking fun at popular movies rather than criticizing the actors themselves. In fact, Costner's film had revived the Robin Hood story for a new generation, which ironically helped create the opportunity for Brooks's parody. Without the success of Prince of Thieves, Men in Tights might never have been made. But thanks to that one clever line about the accent, the parody made its point immediately. It told the audience exactly what kind of movie they were about to watch. A comedy that wasn't afraid to laugh at even the biggest Hollywood hits. 5. Dave Chappelle got one of his first big movie roles. Long before he became one of the most famous comedians in the world, Dave Chappelle was a young actor looking for his breakthrough role. That opportunity came when he was cast as Achu in Robin Hood, Men in Tights. In the movie, Achu is the loyal friend who helps Robin Hood assemble his band of outlaws. He also becomes part of one of the film's most memorable jokes when the villagers mishear his name and repeatedly call him Achu, as if someone had sneezed. At the time, Chappelle was only in his early 20s and still building his career. But even in this early role, it was clear that he had a natural talent for comedy. His quick delivery, relaxed attitude, and sharp timing helped make Achu one of the most entertaining characters in the movie. Director Mel Brooks appreciated actors who could bring their own personality to a role, and Chappelle did exactly that. Many of his reactions and comedic moments felt spontaneous, which made the scenes feel even funnier. Years later, Chappelle would become a household name thanks to his groundbreaking comedy show Chappelle's Show and his influential stand-up performances. But for many fans who look back at his early career, Robin Hood, Men in Tights remains one of the first places where his comedic talent appeared on a big screen. It's a fun reminder that before becoming a comedy legend, Dave Chappelle once played a medieval rebel with a very unusual name. 6. Mel Brooks originally planned to play multiple characters. One of the trademarks of Mel Brooks films is that he often appears on screen himself. In several of his earlier comedies, Brooks didn't just direct the movie, he also played multiple characters. For example, in Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, Brooks showed up in memorable roles that added even more comedy to the story. Because of that tradition, he originally planned to do the same thing in Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Early in development, Brooks considered playing several characters throughout the film, popping up in different disguises as part of the jokes. But as production moved forward, he realized that directing such a large comedy already required most of his attention. Managing big musical numbers, large group scenes, and complicated comedic timing meant he needed to stay focused behind the camera. So instead of appearing everywhere in the movie, Brooks decided to play just one role. That role became Rabbi Tuckman, the hilarious rabbi who performs Robin Hood's circumcision ceremony and later reappears during the wedding scene. The character was a playful parody of Friar Tuck, one of the traditional figures from the Robin Hood legend. The scene instantly became one of the most talked about moments in the film. With his exaggerated accent, dramatic gestures, and classic Mel Brooks delivery, Rabbi Tuckman added a completely unexpected twist to the medieval story. The character also allowed Brooks to include some of the type of humor that had made his earlier films so famous. Even though Brooks appeared only briefly, his performance became one of the most memorable parts of the movie. And in a way, limiting his screen time actually helped the film. It allowed the rest of the cast, especially Cary Elwes and Dave Chappelle, to shine while Brooks focused on directing the comedy from behind the scenes. The result was a film where Brooks's influence could be felt in every joke, even when he wasn't on screen. 7. Several of the funniest moments were improvised. While Robin Hood, Men in Tights had a carefully written script, director Mel Brooks encouraged the cast to experiment with their lines during filming. Brooks had always believed that some of the best comedy happens in the moment. So once the cameras started rolling, he often allowed actors to try different deliveries, reactions, or completely new jokes. This approach worked especially well because the cast included several experienced comedians. Actors like Richard Lewis, who played Prince John, and Dave Chappelle, who played Ushu, were known for their quick improvisational skills. Instead of sticking strictly to the script, they sometimes added their own expressions, gestures, or extra lines that made scenes even funnier. Richard Lewis in particular was famous for his nervous, fast-talking style of comedy. Brooks allowed him to exaggerate Prince John's ridiculous personality, turning the character into a constantly frustrated and insecure villain. Some of Prince John's funniest reactions came from these spontaneous moments. Even Cary Elwes occasionally joined in the improvisation. Although he played the straight-faced hero, he still adjusted certain lines and reactions to match the ridiculous situations happening around him. Mel Brooks would often shoot several versions of the same scene, letting actors try different comedic ideas each time. Later, the funniest moments were selected during editing. This flexible style helped give the movie its natural comedic energy. Instead of feeling overly rehearsed, many scenes feel spontaneous and unpredictable, like the characters themselves are reacting to the madness happening around them. That improvisational spirit is one of the reasons Robin Hood, Men in Tights still feels lively and entertaining decades after its release. 8. The Men in Tights song was almost never included. One of the most memorable scenes in Robin Hood, Men in Tights is the musical number where Robin Hood and his band of outlaws proudly sing about their legendary outfits. The song Men in Tights quickly became one of the most iconic moments in the entire film. The characters dance through the forest, proudly celebrating their tight green costumes while performing an over-the-top musical routine. But surprisingly, this scene almost didn't exist. Director Mel Brooks loved adding musical numbers to his movies, but the production schedule for the film was already packed with action scenes, comedy sequences, and elaborate set pieces. At one point during development, the team considered removing the song entirely to save time and simplify the production. Brooks, however, believed the movie needed a big musical moment. He had already proven how well comedy and music could work together in films like Blazing Saddles and The Producers. Musical numbers allowed him to exaggerate jokes visually while creating scenes audiences would remember long after leaving the theater. So the team decided to keep the song and build a full dance sequence around it. Actors including Cary Elwes had to rehearse choreography and timing to make the performance look both energetic and ridiculous at the same time. The final result became one of the most quoted and recognizable parts of the entire movie. Even people who haven't seen the film often recognize the famous line about Men in Tights. In fact, the musical scene perfectly captures what makes Mel Brooks' comedies so unique. It takes a classic heroic image, Robin Hood and his band of rebels in green costumes, and turns it into a joyful, ridiculous spectacle that celebrates the absurdity of the story. And decades later, that catchy musical moment remains one of the biggest reasons fans still remember the film today. 9. Cary Elwes performed most of his own sword fighting. In many comedies, action scenes are often simplified or played purely for laughs, but in Robin Hood, Men in Tights, the sword fights were actually taken surprisingly seriously. Director Mel Brooks believed the action needed to look real in order for the jokes to work. If the fighting looked sloppy or fake, the parody wouldn't feel convincing. That's why Cary Elwes ended up performing most of his own sword fighting during filming. Elwes already had experience with swordplay from his role in The Princess Bride, which featured one of the most famous fencing scenes in movie history. Because of that background, the production team trusted him to handle many of the physical action sequences. Before filming began, Elwes went through additional training to prepare for the Robin Hood fights. The choreography had to balance two things at the same time: believable medieval combat and perfectly timed comedy. Many scenes were carefully rehearsed so the actors could move quickly while still delivering jokes and reactions. For example, during some of the duels in the movie, the swordplay starts out looking like a traditional adventure film. Then suddenly something ridiculous happens. A character slips, a joke interrupts the fight, or the scene turns into a comedic surprise. That contrast is what makes the moment funny. The audience sees what appears to be a serious, swashbuckling duel, only for the situation to spiral into pure Mel Brooks chaos. Elwes later said he enjoyed doing the sword fights himself because it helped him fully commit to the heroic side of the character. Even though the movie was a comedy, he treated the action like a real Robin Hood adventure. And that dedication actually made the parody stronger. Because when the hero looks authentic, the ridiculous jokes surrounding him become even funnier. 10. The sets were designed to look like classic Robin Hood films. When audiences watch Robin Hood, Men in Tights, the movie may feel completely ridiculous, but the production design was actually built to look like a serious medieval adventure. Director Mel Brooks believed parody works best when the world looks real. If everything already looked silly, the jokes wouldn't land as strongly. So instead of building cartoon-like sets, the production team created castles, forests, and medieval villages that looked similar to the settings from classic Robin Hood films. Many of the visual elements were intentionally inspired by the adventures of Robin Hood, the famous 1938 version starring Errol Flynn. That movie featured bright medieval costumes, dramatic castle halls, and heroic forest hideouts. Those same elements appear in Men in Tights, but with a comedic twist. For example, Prince John's castle looks grand and imposing, just like the villains' castles in traditional adventure movies. But once the characters begin speaking and reacting, the serious atmosphere quickly collapses into absurd comedy. The same idea applies to Sherwood Forest. The forest scenes are filmed like a classic swashbuckling adventure, with Robin Hood gathering his band of rebels and preparing to challenge the corrupt rulers. But instead of epic speeches and dramatic tension, the characters burst into jokes, songs, and ridiculous arguments. This contrast was exactly what Brooks wanted. By creating a believable medieval setting, the film could suddenly interrupt that seriousness with unexpected comedy. The result feels like a real Robin Hood movie that constantly refuses to behave like one. That attention to detail helped the parody feel richer and more entertaining. Even though the film is full of absurd humor, the world around the characters still looks like it belongs in a traditional heroic legend, and that's part of what makes the jokes land so well. 11. The film is packed with hidden Mel Brooks Easter eggs. Fans of Mel Brooks quickly noticed that Robin Hood, Men in Tights doesn't just parody Robin Hood stories. It also quietly references several of Brooks' earlier films. Brooks had a long history of hiding small inside jokes and references in his movies. These little Easter eggs were often subtle enough that casual viewers might miss them, but longtime fans loved spotting them. For example, the style of exaggerated villains and ridiculous authority figures in Men in Tights feels very similar to the characters in Blazing Saddles. Brooks often enjoyed portraying arrogant rulers or officials who believed they were powerful but were actually incompetent. That same idea appears in Prince John and the Sheriff of Rottingham, who constantly argue, panic, and fail to control the situation. There are also moments that remind viewers of Spaceballs, another Brooks parody famous for breaking the fourth wall and making fun of movie cliches. In several scenes of Men in Tights, characters suddenly react to the absurdity of their own situation or comment on what's happening around them in a way that feels very similar to the humor used in Spaceballs. Even the musical style of the film reflects Brooks' earlier work. Brooks had already proven his love for comedy musicals with the producers, and that influence clearly appears in the energetic songs and exaggerated dance numbers in Men in Tights. These hidden connections make the movie feel like part of a larger Mel Brooks comedy universe. Longtime fans often enjoy spotting these little references because they show how Brooks carried the same comedic style across decades of filmmaking. Instead of repeating the same jokes, he kept reinventing them in new settings, from westerns to space adventures to medieval legends. And with Robin Hood, Men in Tights, he once again proved that almost any genre could become hilarious in the hands of the right director. 12. Patrick Stewart's cameo was one of the film's biggest surprises. Near the end of Robin Hood, Men in Tights, the story takes an unexpected turn when a mysterious figure appears during the wedding scene. Suddenly, the audience sees none other than Patrick Stewart stepping into the scene as King Richard. For many viewers in 1993, this cameo was a huge surprise. At the time, Stewart was already widely known for playing Captain Jean-Luc Picard on the popular science fiction series Star Trek: The Next Generation. Seeing him suddenly appear in a medieval comedy caught audiences completely off guard. That surprise is exactly what director Mel Brooks wanted. Brooks loved unexpected celebrity appearances in his movies because they added another layer of humor. When a well-known actor suddenly appeared in a ridiculous situation, the moment instantly became funnier. In the scene, Stewart plays King Richard in a very dramatic and heroic style, almost as if he stepped straight out of a serious historical epic, but within seconds the tone becomes pure comedy. After Robin Hood wins the right to marry Maid Marian, King Richard announces that he will personally take Marian as his queen instead, completely interrupting the happy ending. Then Robin Hood politely suggests that maybe the king should choose someone else. So King Richard suddenly turns to the audience and says, "All right, I'll take her." At that moment, the camera reveals that the king has chosen Broomhilda, the giant woman who had earlier tried to marry Little John. The ridiculous twist perfectly captures the movie's style of humor. Patrick Stewart's straight-faced delivery made the scene even funnier because he treated the moment like a serious royal announcement. That short cameo became one of the film's most memorable moments, and for many fans, it remains one of the funniest surprise appearances in any Mel Brooks comedy. 13. Richard Lewis nearly turned down the role of Prince John. One of the funniest performances in Robin Hood, Men in Tights, comes from comedian Richard Lewis, who plays the constantly frustrated villain Prince John. But surprisingly, Lewis almost didn't take the role. At the time, Richard Lewis was best known for his stand-up comedy and television appearances. His style of humor was very modern, fast-talking, sarcastic, and often focused on everyday problems. Because of that, he initially wasn't sure he would fit into a medieval comedy. After all, Prince John is supposed to be a royal villain living in the Middle Ages. Lewis reportedly worried that his modern comedic style might feel out of place in a historical parody. However, director Mel Brooks actually wanted exactly that. Brooks loved the idea of a medieval prince who behaved like a stressed-out modern comedian. Instead of playing the character like a traditional villain, Lewis would bring his nervous, complaining personality to the role. Once Lewis understood Brooks's vision, he agreed to join the film. The result was one of the most memorable characters in the movie. Prince John constantly argues with his advisor, complains about Robin Hood ruining his plans, and reacts with dramatic frustration whenever something goes wrong. His exaggerated anger, combined with his quick delivery, gave the villain a completely different energy compared to traditional Robin Hood stories. Rather than being intimidating, Prince John becomes hilariously incompetent, and that contrast makes every scene funnier. Many fans now consider Richard Lewis's performance one of the highlights of the entire movie. His unique style turned Prince John into a villain audiences love to watch fail. In fact, it's hard to imagine Robin Hood, Men in Tights, without his chaotic and constantly irritated version of the character. 14. The name Sheriff of Rottingham was a joke that almost didn't survive. One of the funniest running jokes in Robin Hood. Men in Tights involves the villain known as the Sheriff of Rottingham, played by Roger Rees. The character is a parody of the classic Sheriff of Nottingham, the traditional enemy of Robin Hood in countless stories and films. But director Mel Brooks decided to twist the name into something far more ridiculous. Instead of Nottingham, Brooks changed it to Rottingham. The joke worked on multiple levels. It sounded almost correct, but the slight change made it feel absurd, perfectly matching the tone of the movie. However, the name almost didn't make it into the film. During early discussions, some people involved with the production worried the joke might be too silly or confusing. Because the Sheriff of Nottingham was such a famous character in the Robin Hood legend, there was concern that changing the name might distract audiences. Mel Brooks strongly disagreed. He believed that comedy often works best when it exaggerates familiar ideas. By slightly twisting the name of a well-known character, the film immediately signaled that this version of the Robin Hood story would not take itself seriously. Brooks eventually got his way, and the name stayed. Roger Rees then fully embraced the ridiculousness of the character. Instead of playing the sheriff as a frightening villain, Rees turned him into a dramatic, theatrical figure who constantly tries and fails to appear powerful. His exaggerated expressions and dramatic delivery made every scene feel like a comedy performance. The result was a villain who perfectly fit the tone of the movie. Rather than being intimidating like the sheriffs in traditional Robin Hood films, the Sheriff of Rottingham becomes one of the most hilariously incompetent characters in the story. And thanks to that slightly ridiculous name, audiences knew from the very beginning that this version of the legend would be anything but traditional. 15. The musical numbers were designed to parody Hollywood musicals. While Robin Hood, Men in Tights is mostly known as a parody of medieval adventure films, it also secretly mocks another genre, classic Hollywood musicals. Director Mel Brooks had always loved musical comedy. In fact, some of his earlier projects were built almost entirely around musical humor. Because of that, he decided to include several musical numbers in the movie that would exaggerate the style of traditional movie musicals. Instead of appearing naturally in the story, the songs suddenly explode into the film in the most ridiculous way possible. Characters break into choreographed dance routines in the middle of the forest. Outlaws sing proudly about their outfits. Villagers and guards suddenly move in perfect rhythm as if they had rehearsed for weeks. This exaggerated style was intentional. Brooks wanted the scenes to feel like they belonged in a huge Broadway-style production rather than a medieval adventure movie. The sudden shift from action to singing created an unexpected comedic surprise. The most famous example is the Men in Tights number, where Robin Hood and his group proudly celebrate their legendary costumes. The choreography, the dramatic poses, and the over-the-top enthusiasm all parody the style of classic Hollywood musical sequences. But behind the comedy, the scenes were carefully planned. Actors including Cary Elwes and the rest of the cast had to rehearse the dances so the timing of the jokes would work perfectly. Every step, movement, and reaction had to match the rhythm of the music. This mixture of serious choreography and ridiculous lyrics is what makes the scenes so funny. The characters perform like they are in a grand musical production, while the audience realizes how absurd the situation actually is. That combination of parody and musical energy became one of the defining features of the film, and another example of how Mel Brooks loved blending different genres into one unforgettable comedy. 16. Some jokes were removed because they were too risky. Anyone familiar with Mel Brooks knows that he has never been afraid to push the boundaries of comedy. His films often included bold jokes, outrageous situations, and humor that challenged what audiences expected. Robin Hood, Men in Tights was no exception. During filming, Brooks and the cast experimented with many different jokes and comedic moments. Some of them were so over the top that they eventually had to be removed before the movie reached theaters. In the early 1990s, studios were still cautious about certain types of humor, especially in big theatrical releases. Because of that, some of Brooks's more extreme jokes were considered too risky or too controversial. A few scenes were shortened, while others were cut entirely during editing. This wasn't unusual for a Mel Brooks film. Brooks often filmed multiple versions of scenes with different jokes, then decided later which ones worked best for the final cut. Sometimes the funniest ideas stayed, while others were left on the editing room floor simply because they might have caused problems with the studio or the film's rating. Despite those cuts, the movie still kept plenty of Brooks' classic humor. The film includes playful jokes about authority figures, exaggerated stereotypes, and unexpected fourth-wall moments where the characters seem aware that they're in a movie. Even with some material removed, Men in Tights still feels like a pure Mel Brooks comedy. The humor moves quickly, the jokes come from every direction, and the story constantly shifts from heroic adventure to ridiculous parody. And in many ways, the jokes that remained were strong enough to turn the movie into a cult classic that fans still quote decades later. 17. The entire movie was filmed surprisingly fast. Even though Robin Hood, Men in Tights includes musical numbers, sword fights, large sets, and dozens of actors, the movie was actually filmed on a surprisingly tight schedule. Director Mel Brooks was known for working quickly. Unlike massive Hollywood productions that sometimes spend a year filming, Brooks preferred to keep productions efficient and focused. As a result, the entire film was shot in only a few months. That was impressive considering the scale of the movie. The production had to film forest scenes, castle interiors, large group sequences, and several complicated musical numbers, all within a short period of time. To make this possible, Brooks relied heavily on careful planning. Many scenes were rehearsed before filming even began, so that the actors already understood the timing of the jokes and choreography. This preparation allowed the crew to move quickly from one scene to another without wasting valuable time. The cast also helped speed things up. Actors like Cary Elwes and Richard Lewis were experienced performers who could deliver their lines with strong comedic timing, often getting the scene right within just a few takes. This efficiency was especially important for the musical numbers. Dance scenes require coordination between the actors, the camera crew, and the music. But because the choreography had been practiced ahead of time, those sequences could be filmed much faster than expected. Mel Brooks later said that keeping the production schedule tight actually helped the comedy. When actors work quickly, they often keep their energy high and their reactions fresh. That spontaneous energy can make jokes feel more natural and lively on screen. The fast-paced filming style matched the spirit of the movie itself. Just like the story moves rapidly from one joke to the next, the production moved quickly from scene to scene, helping create the energetic comedy that audiences still enjoy today. 18. Cary Elwes says it's one of his favorite roles. Over the years, Cary Elwes has appeared in many films, from fantasy classics to thrillers and dramas. But when fans ask him about the roles he enjoyed the most, he often mentions Robin Hood, Men in Tights. According to Elwes, working with director Mel Brooks was one of the highlights of his career. Brooks had already become a legendary comedy filmmaker by the time the movie was made, and many actors admired his ability to turn simple ideas into unforgettable comedic moments. Elwes has said that Brooks created an environment where actors felt comfortable experimenting with their performances. Instead of forcing every scene to follow a strict plan, Brooks allowed the cast to try different deliveries and reactions until the comedy felt just right. That freedom made the filming process extremely enjoyable. Elwes also loved the challenge of playing the straight hero in a ridiculous world. Robin Hood is supposed to be brave, noble, and confident, but in this movie, he constantly finds himself surrounded by absurd characters and chaotic situations. By playing the character seriously, Elwes helped the comedy work even better. Fans also responded strongly to his performance. For many viewers, his version of Robin Hood perfectly captured the spirit of classic adventure heroes while still embracing the parody. The combination of heroic charm and subtle comedic timing made his character both funny and likable. Even decades after the movie's release, fans still approach Elwes to quote lines from the film or talk about their favorite scenes. Because of that lasting popularity, Elwes has often said that he feels proud to have been part of the movie. Out of all the projects in his long career, Robin Hood, Men in Tights remains one of the films that audiences remember most fondly, and one that Elwes clearly enjoyed making. 19. The movie is one of the most quoted comedy films of the 1990s. Even though Robin Hood, Men in Tights was released in 1993, many of its jokes are still quoted by fans today. Director Mel Brooks had a talent for writing lines that were simple, memorable, and instantly funny. Instead of complicated jokes, many of the film's best moments come from quick one-liners that audiences can easily remember. One of the most famous lines happens at the very beginning when Robin Hood says, "Unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent." Another fan favorite comes from the musical number where the outlaws proudly sing about being men in tights. And of course, there are the running jokes involving characters like Prince John, the Sheriff of Rottingham, and the constantly confused villagers. These lines worked so well because the humor was built around familiar movie cliches. Brooks would set up a scene that looked like a serious medieval adventure, then suddenly interrupt it with a ridiculous line. That unexpected twist made the jokes easy to remember. Over the years, fans of Mel Brooks' comedies have continued sharing quotes from the film, keeping its humor alive long after its original release. The movie is often mentioned alongside other Brooks classics like Blazing Saddles and Spaceballs, both of which are also famous for their endlessly quotable dialogue. Because of this, Robin Hood, Men in Tights gradually developed a strong cult following. People who grew up watching the movie still revisit it decades later, often introducing it to younger viewers who discover the jokes for the first time. And that ability to remain funny after so many years is one of the biggest reasons the film continues to be remembered as one of the great comedy parodies of the 1990s. 20. Critics were mixed at first, but fans turned it into a cult classic. When Robin Hood, Men in Tights first arrived in theaters, the reaction from critics was somewhat mixed. Some reviewers enjoyed the film's playful parody style, but others felt that Mel Brooks' comedy was beginning to feel different from his earlier classics. By the early 1990s, Brooks had already created legendary films like Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Because those movies had become so beloved, critics sometimes compared every new Brooks film to those earlier masterpieces. That made expectations extremely high. As a result, some critics didn't fully appreciate Men in Tights when it was first released, but audiences had a different reaction. Moviegoers who enjoyed Brooks' style of humor found the film hilarious, and many viewers returned to watch it multiple times. The movie performed solidly at the box office and quickly found an even larger audience when it was released on home video. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, the film gained popularity through television broadcasts and DVD releases. Over time, more and more fans began to recognize it as one of the most entertaining parody films of its era. Today, many viewers look back at the movie much more fondly than critics originally did. It's now considered a cult classic, meaning it developed a loyal fan base that continues to celebrate it long after its original release. And for many fans of Mel Brooks, Robin Hood, Men in Tights represents the final major parody film from one of comedy's greatest directors. 21. It was one of Mel Brooks' final big parody films. By the time Robin Hood Men in Tights was released in 1993, Mel Brooks had already spent decades redefining comedy in Hollywood. Starting in the late 1960s, Brooks built a reputation for creating some of the most famous parody films ever made. Instead of simply telling funny stories, he specialized in taking popular movie genres and turning them completely upside down. He mocked westerns in Blazing Saddles, classic horror movies in Young Frankenstein, and science fiction blockbusters in Spaceballs. Each of these films became legendary because Brooks understood exactly how to exaggerate the cliches of each genre while still creating memorable characters. Robin Hood, Men in Tights followed that same formula. This time, Brooks took the familiar medieval legend of Robin Hood, one of the most serious and heroic stories in cinema, and transformed it into a comedy filled with absurd jokes, musical numbers, and ridiculous villains. For many fans, the movie represents the final chapter of Brooks' classic parody era. Although he continued working in entertainment after this film, Men in Tights was one of the last times he directed a large theatrical parody in the style that had made him famous. Because of that, the movie holds a special place in the history of comedy. It captures the signature elements that defined Brooks' career: fearless humor, playful satire, and a willingness to make fun of Hollywood itself. More than 30 years later, the film still stands as a reminder of what made Mel Brooks one of the most influential comedy filmmakers of all time. And for fans who love outrageous parodies, Robin Hood, Men in Tights remains one of the funniest adventures ever to come out of Sherwood Forest. More than 3 decades after its release, Robin Hood, Men in Tights continues to make audiences laugh with its ridiculous jokes, unforgettable characters, and classic Mel Brooks humor. What started as a playful parody of Robin Hood films has become a beloved cult classic. And whether it's the legendary one-liners, the outrageous musical numbers, or the hilarious villains, one thing is clear: this comedy adventure still proves that sometimes the best heroes really do wear tights.